a little quiz. If you have your program in front of you, you know the answer to the quiz. Who is the owner and the president of Talisman Enterprises, a multimedia company for entertainment and education? All right. Very good. Who has worked at the Baha'i National Center as the program coordinator for the Office of Public Affairs, has worked on the National Education Committee, on the International Goals Committee? Morris Taylor. Wonderful. You're doing so well. Who has done travel teaching to throughout the Caribbean, including the Bahamas, Bermuda, Virgin, Leeward Islands, numerous news media interviews? Does this guy know where to go? All right. And has pioneered to Bermuda, has been secretary of the Bermuda Teaching Committee, and on and on. He serves as a delegate to the Baha'i National Convention. And who is going to speak to us now on the subject of foibles of the formative age? Thank you.
Who is too embarrassed to continue? Morris Taylor. But he will, yes. Is this mic okay? No problem? Okay. Good morning. As our chairperson indicated, I did work at the Baha'i National Center for 5 years. And during my first couple of months there, I had the pleasure of meeting and getting to know a very wonderful young Baha'i woman named Claire Katz. Maybe some of you know who I'm talking about. Claire worked for the International Goals Committee office for about a year. She was a former pioneer to Liberia in Africa. Claire was a seasoned travel teacher, very much in love with the faith, and really a very devoted and sincere worker for the cause. Claire left the Baha'i National Center, I believe, in 1980. She moved to Texas, where she went back to school and began a master's degree program in public health, her goal being to return to the international pioneer field. Well, unfortunately, this was never to be. While in Texas, Claire became ill rather suddenly, and in December of 1983, Claire Katz died of cancer. She was 29 years old. Now, I mentioned Claire this morning because Claire had a most wonderful sense of humor. She really had the ability to see the lighter side of life, which was good because Claire often found herself in some rather humorous situations. The point is, more than once, Claire said to me, one day I'm going to write a book, and I'm going to call it Foibles of the Formative Age. And it will be all about some of the funny things in the faith. Well, Claire never wrote that book, but I have borrowed her proposed title, and I'd like to dedicate this presentation to Claire's beautiful spirit. What is a foible? The dictionary defines a foible as a minor weakness of character. A flaw. Now, the faith itself has no flaws. Okay? It has no inherent weaknesses. It really is quite perfect. The believers, on the other hand, are another story. I think in our efforts to understand and to love and to serve this faith, sometimes our weaknesses, our flaws, our foibles are exposed. Oftentimes, I think, with interesting results. What I've done is I have selected certain categories in relation to the faith, and what I'd like to do is just share with you a few of my observations and perceptions, thereby exposing my foibles, by the way, in regards to these subjects. The 7 categories, by the way, are first contact, great expectations, how we are perceived, adventures in teaching, tradition, Baha'i humor, and consultation. So let me just show you what I mean. The first contact is, the first category is first contact. It is very interesting to me how people first come in contact with the Baha'i faith. It's very interesting to me. For example, I had a history teacher in high school who was a Baha'i. And she was different. For instance, this lady, we'd be in class, okay? She'd make us all sit in a circle, which was very innovative in the mid-'70s to sit in a circle. And she would bring in a Coke bottle, an empty Coke bottle, and sit it in the middle of the floor, in the middle of the circle. And she'd say, I want you to write a paper on what this Coke bottle would tell you about the civilization in which it was produced if you were to find this at an archaeological dig. All right, you have 50 minutes. This is the kind of thing she did. She was very interesting. And at one point, she introduced us to different religions, and that's how I first heard about the Baha'i faith. Well, anyway, a number of people at the school became Baha'is through her. And one of them was a very large football player who became a Baha'i. I had played football with him 1 year in high school. And he, believe me, he had very clearly been transformed by the revelation of God for this day. However, he was still quite big, and when he gave me a copy of Baha'i World Faith, he said, I want you to read this book. And my response was, absolutely. Now, the book was Baha'i World Faith. Now, I don't know if that's the best book to pick up first, all right? You know, it has Baha'u'llah on the front and then Abdu'l-Baha on the back. Well, the language to me, as a junior, I guess, in high school, was very different. I don't mean to be sacrilegious, but the best word I can think of is flowery. It was a lot of adjectives and very, very poetic, and I was used to like Fantastic Four comic books. I wasn't used to. And I remember reading this book, which had been given to me so wonderfully by this gentleman, and I remember I would read, and Baha'u'llah would say, I'm here, I'm here. And I'd say, who's here? Who's here? And I'd read a little further, and he'd say, the time has come, the time has come. And I'd say, what time has come? What time has come? And he'd say, rejoice, rejoice. I'd say, for what? For what? I shut the book, gave it back to this football player. I said, hey, great book. I really got into it. He says, oh, yeah? Well, you can keep it a while. I said, oh, no. Finish the whole thing. That's just fine. You know, Abdu'l-Baha, of course, reads very differently. He really writes for the Western mind. But I didn't know that at the time, and so I never went that far. And it was quite a while before I picked up any Baha'i material after that. Now, once you become a Baha'i, you kind of get caught up in the milieu of Baha'i thinking, okay, wherever you happen to be. And I remember getting caught up in some very great expectations and hopes. For instance, as a new Baha'i, I was running with a crowd for a while that was really into the idea of famous people becoming Baha'is. Do you know what I'm talking about? I'll bet you do. How many of you have played that game? How many of you have said, I wish so-and-so would become a Baha'i? Some famous person. Raise your hand. Tell the truth. Of course, sure you have. The lady right here laughing, who were you thinking of? Right here. You've got on a pink badge and a white suit. Right here. Yeah. Yeah. Who are you thinking of? Just shout out a name. Barbara Streisand. Give me another one. Who is that? John Denver. Billy Graham. You know, and there were always rumors of who was a Baha'i, right? Huh? The big one when I was coming up was Captain Kangaroo. Did you run into that one? Anybody hear that one? For years when I was a new Baha'i, I heard Captain Kangaroo. Oh yeah, he's Baha'i. Oh yeah, Captain Kangaroo, he's Baha'i. Bunny Rabbit, Mr. Moose, they're all Baha'is. Or I met a girl at Baha'i summer school whose father was on an assembly with the man who gave Captain Kangaroo a book. He's Baha'i. Now, friends, I like Captain Kangaroo. I grew up watching the Captain. I really did. I have nothing against him. But why the Baha'is wanted this man in particular? This man who talked to puppets and rolled around in ping pong balls and had a name like Kangaroo. Why they wanted him to be a Baha'i, I don't know. But they did. They just had it in their heads that this man, you know, is Baha'i. Now, some people I can understand. Like Like Mr. T. Now, if the Baha'is wanted Mr. T to be a Baha'i, I could understand that. Think about it. You get him on the feast tape. And he'd say, hey, what's the matter with you people? Don't you know what Baha'u'llah said about giving to the fund? Huh? Or he'd say, what do you mean you're not coming to district convention? You better be there, fool. And the funny thing is that the Baha'is would come then. If the NSA says come, they may not come. But if Mr. T says come, they'll be there. And you know, we have to be careful about that kind of thing, because if it gets out to the non-Baha'i world that we're trying to get people like Captain Kangaroo and Mr. T to be Baha'is, we're going to look stranger to them than we already do. Have you ever thought about that? How we are perceived by the non-Baha'i world? I have. I was forced to by the people I work with. Let me tell you, I work for Allstate Insurance. I'm a financial analyst for the direct marketing branch of Allstate. And I work in a company with about 5,000 people. And I have to explain, you see, when I graduated from college, I entered the workforce overseas as a pioneer. And I was there, and then I came back and I went to the Baha'i National Center to work, which is a different environment entirely. Right, National Center staff? Right. And after that, I entered the real world. So I was a little confused about what the real world was like. And now don't get me wrong, Allstate is a fine company and these are very nice people, but they're not Baha'is. Period. All right? They're not Baha'is. Nice people, but not Baha'is. Well, the point is, after I'd been there a very short period, I noticed people kept calling me brother and bro. Hey, bro. Hey, brother, is that report ready? Hey, bro, you got those slides for me yet? I thought they were Mennonites or something. I didn't know what. Bro this and brother that. Well, one day I was sitting at the computer terminal working on some slides, and the girl behind me was commenting on something, and she called me brother. And so I stopped, and I turned around, and I said, what is this brother stuff? Why does everybody call me brother? And she looked at me, she says, you don't know? I said, no. She says, brother is short for brother from another planet. Evidently, there was a movie by the same name, and they just picked that up. And I was just dumbfounded. I said, what are you talking about? She said, well, you know, you don't drink. You don't smoke. We're still waiting for you to say a curse word. She says, you'll go on break and to lunch with anybody. I mean anybody. You don't care who you're seen with. She says, and you're always happy. She says, Morris, you're just strange. So you never know when people are watching and what kind of impression you're leaving. Take fasting, for instance. Please take fasting. No. You know, when we fast, we use it as the perfect opportunity to teach, don't we? We sit at a big table with lots of people eating lunch, and then we just kind of sit there and look spiritual. And they say, aren't you eating? And you go, no. And you go, ask me why. And you go on and explain to them all about the Baha'i faith, and it's a wonderful teaching opportunity. But sometimes I don't think we realize exactly what it is we're teaching. I'll give you an example. As I said, I was a pioneer in Bermuda. At the time, I rented a room from a Bermudian couple. Their names were Chumley, Sylvia and Wesley Chumley. I shared a kitchen with them. Well, that first evening of fast, that first year, I remember I had this huge plate of food. Now, that says it all, doesn't it? I mean, I had rice, I had potatoes, I had chicken, I had turkey, I had ham, I had a bowl of vegetables here, I had a milkshake over there. I mean, this thing is like sitting like this, and I'm just watching the clock, you know. Tick, tick, tick. My landlord, Mr. Chumley, he comes in, he takes a look at this. He goes, you know, you have to understand, the Bermudians have a strange accent. It's kind of West Indies, but it's kind of British, and there's kind of an Irish brogue. Mr. Chumley sees this great plate of food. He says, Taylor, you call this fasting, man? He says, what you gonna tell God, huh? What you gonna tell God? And I remember he looks at this food, he goes to the door, he says, Sylvia, he calls his wife, Sylvia, come quick, see what the Baha's doing now. he had a point, though. I gained 7 pounds that year. As an aside, speaking of Bermuda and the way people perceive you, I learned a long time ago that when I travel, particularly for the faith, I should dress well. I learned that. Now, some people will say, if you dress too well in airplanes, especially the international flights, you will attract attention. You'll stand out in the eyes of skyjackers, should, God forbid, your plane be seized. Well, that may be true. But I'll tell you what, I would rather wear a coat and tie and take a chance of running into skyjackers than not wear a coat and tie and run into one of those international baggage check people. Do you know what I'm talking about? I have done it both ways, with a coat and tie and without a coat and tie. And believe me, you get better treatment in a coat and tie. There's no doubt about it. In fact, I have a method. A, wear a coat and tie. B, good posture. Good posture. Shoulders back, good posture. And C, every 30 seconds, look at your watch like you're in a hurry. Kind of irritated. When you get up there, they pass you right on. They do. I know. I have tried it in many situations in many countries. They won't touch you. Now, I have learned my lesson through trial and error. One time, I was on my way back to my post in Bermuda. I think I'd been home for Christmas or something, and I did not wear a coat and tie. What a mistake. I was at immigration's coming. They'll let you out of the country looking like anything. But getting back in, I was going back into Bermuda. I was at immigration's. There was an immigration's lady. She looks at my bag. She looks at me. She looks at my bag. She says, open it. I said, oh, my gosh. Now, this had never happened before. And on this particular trip, you see, I worked as a professional magician in Bermuda. And on this particular trip, I was coming back with some magic props. As luck would have it. This woman goes into my bag. She starts tossing clothes everywhere. She gets to the dancing handkerchief. She grabs this thing, and it's like... She just puts that. Then she finds in the bottom of the bag this hard, round object that is ticking. Now, it was a clock. It was a clock that had been given me, I think, by my sister, but it was perfectly round with a small little square base, and it was wind up, and it ticked. I mean, nobody knows that bombs are not round and tick. But this is the first thing you think of. And she carefully unwraps this thing, and to her disappointment, it was a clock. Then she pulled on this colorful scarf. She yanked it out of the bag, and attached to it was another colorful scarf. And attached to it was another, and another, and another. And I know she spent a good 15 seconds just pulling this long line of scarves out of this bag. When she had finally dumped everything out on her little table, and I was starting to relax, she reached into the seemingly empty bag, and she discovered, much to my chagrin, a hidden secret pocket. And she unzipped this hidden secret pocket, and from within she withdrew a rather dingy, plain paper bag. She opened this paper bag, which had been tucked in the obscure corner of this hidden secret pocket, and she found a medium-sized plastic baggie containing what looked like finely chopped, sunburnt crabgrass. And with a twinkle in her eye, she held up this baggie, which contained what appeared to be finely chopped, sunburnt crabgrass, which she had found in the hidden secret pocket. And she said to me, quote, "And what is this?" unquote. And with as much calm and decorum as I could muster at that moment in my life, I said to her, quote, "Would you believe red zinger tea?" unquote. And her response was, "No, sir." It really was red zinger tea. You see, a well-meaning friend had given this to me on the way back, and I thought he was going to give me tea bags. And he gives me this stuff that looks like you know what. And I said, I'll never get this by immigration, so I hid it in this hidden secret pocket. Well, this woman, she's got a real find here. And she is, checking around. She checks with her supervisor. He checks with his supervisor. Well, after a while, the head security man, who, by the way, was an American, showed up, and he did indeed recognize it as Red Zinger tea. Well, just at that moment, the Bermudian believer who was supposed to meet me at the airport appeared. And she saw what was happening. She says to the officer, this man is a Baha'i. You don't have to worry about him. He doesn't fool with that stuff. And the clerk says, oh, he's Baha'i? Oh, it's okay, sir. You can go. And I turn around and spread across the countertop are all my clothes. The dancing handkerchief is still wreathing across the table. The multicolored silks are all over, and my Red Zinger tea is like confetti, kind of spread all over everything. Never again. I always wear a coat and tie when I travel now. But really, as a Baha'i, the way we look is very important. It really is very important in our teaching. Whether we're consciously aware of it or not, we are always teaching the faith. But of course, this is what teaching is all about. It's an adventure. We're constantly being bombarded with opportunities to teach, and there are 1,000,001 ways to take advantage of them. It all depends on the circumstances and on your personality. For example, I had a friend who was in Bahamas. He was a pioneer. I will not mention his name because there are just too many counselors and board members in this audience. But I remember an episode where he was street teaching, and he ran into some gentlemen who were selling non-prescription drugs in a non-prescription manner. And they were trying to encourage him to make a substantial purchase. And I remember him saying, oh, man, that ain't nothing, man. He says, I got something better than that. He says, I got some stuff from Persia. The guy says, oh, yeah, man. He says, yeah, man. He says, pure, the best stuff in the world. He said, you haven't been high till you've had this. So the guy says, let me have some. He says, no, man. He says, I can't do it right here on the street. He says, but if you'll come to this address, and he gave him the address of the National Center in the Bahamas on Shirley Street. You think I'm making this up. It's on Shirley Street, I know. And he says, if you'll come here tomorrow night, I'll hook you up. He says, now, but don't come high. He says, you don't want to take this stuff high. It's too much. He says, but you come and bring all your buddies, and I'll hook you up. So sure enough, the next night, this guy shows up at the Hazarado Kuds, and it's a fireside. He's upset. He walked out with all his paraphernalia and most of his followers, but 2 of them stayed. And in a few months, 2 of them actually enrolled as Baha'is. Teaching is interesting. You just don't know what's going to happen. I enrolled at the University of Virginia, Ralph Sampson and like that. And it was interesting. A very interesting place to be a Baha'i. It's a big drinking school. I remember Playboy magazine ranked UVA as the biggest drinking school in the country 2 years in a row. The 3rd year, they didn't put them on the ranking chart. And when UVA asked why, Playboy said, quote, it's not fair to rank professionals with amateurs. That's why I declared, okay? And their big motto was, if you can hold on to the floor, you're not drunk. It's that kind of thing. I'll never forget trying to teach there, a brand new Baha'i. One episode I was teaching, this fellow was standing at the door of the suite with one hand on the knob and the other hand on his hip. I was about 10 feet away with just a pair of shorts on and a towel because I was about to take a shower. And we stood there from 12:30 a.m. until 4 a.m., just like that. Him by the door, me by the shower, arguing about the faith. And I can't forget, he just kept saying over and over, I can't believe you turned your back on Jesus for some guy named Bob. And then, of course, there's street teaching. Now, this is something entirely different. You have the most interesting adventures on the street. Especially when you go in those rough neighborhoods. You know what I mean by rough neighborhoods? You know, it's the ones where the electronic street signs flash walk, don't walk, and take cover. So, I'm making a joke, but you all know what kind of neighborhoods I'm talking about. We've all been street teaching in those neighborhoods at some point. In fact, for some of us, it was the turning point in our street teaching careers. Anyway, in 1981, I was part of a youth project. About 10 of us went down to the Caribbean. We went through something like 8 islands in 4 weeks. And I remember one episode where we were street teaching in St. Kitts, which is a very rural community. One of the projecteers was evidently having a difficult time holding the attention of a small group of youth. And he says, nothing else to say. He says, well, you know, Morris is a magician. I mean, you just don't know. And I'm like giving signals. No, don't say that. No. And they're really getting excited. He says, oh, yeah, Morris will show you some stuff. Come on, Morris, show him some stuff. Well, I was forced to do some stuff. I think what I did was I took 4 quarters and made them pass one at a time through a tabletop. And this just impressed the heck out of them. The problem was, my friend then expected me to tell them how it was done. And you see, you have to understand that voodoo and black magic is very big in some of those islands, including St. Kitts. So when I did that stuff, their eyes just went like that. And now my friend expects me to tell them how it's done, not on your life. I'm a magician. I took an oath. I'm not telling nothing. So the rest of the day, this group of youth is following us around going, black magic Baha'i, voodoo Baha'i. It's not funny. And there was this one guy, he had a pack of cigarettes in his shirt pocket. He kept going, make the cigarette jump out my pocket. Make the cigarette jump out my pocket. It was terrible. It was awful. I'll never forget that one. I'll never forgive that guy either. Foibles of the formative age. Let's look for a minute at tradition. You know, some people will tell you that we do not have doctrine or dogma in the Baha'i faith, and that tradition really isn't a big factor. Well, maybe not where you come from. But where I'm from, there are a couple of traditions that will not die. I mean, it's like Night of the Living Dead. They just keep coming back. For instance, red punch. Now, I don't know about your community, but my community cannot have a 19-day feast without red punch. They've got cherry punch, they've got strawberry punch, they've got raspberry punch, but it's red. It's always red. And you know, if they have something that's, you know, like a clear color, like lemonade or lime soda, they'll put food coloring in it. It's got to be red. The color of Baha'u'llah or something. I don't know what it is. Now, you guys are laughing, but I know it's going to happen. Somebody from some feast committee is going to get upset, and I'm going to find red punch in my gas tank when I try to leave here. Hey, don't get mad with me. I just call them like I see them. Another tradition that simply will not die, and I think we can all relate to this. Picture this. It's late at night. It's after like a fireside or a deepening or a feast or something. And all the Baha'is get together and they go to the local pancake house or restaurant or something, okay? And they order coffee and dessert. And there's several of you, so you always request that corner booth. You know, the one that kind of curves around so all of you can squeeze together at one table. Sound familiar so far? So you have your coffee and you have your dessert and you start to talk about the faith and teaching and so on. But then as the hour grows late, and the place starts to empty out and all the coffee is gone, the Baha'is start to huddle real close. And they start to talk in very low and serious tones. And they start to talk about what? The calamity. Am I right? Huh? Hey, I didn't declare yesterday. I know a little bit about the friends. The Baha'is love to talk about the calamity. They do. It's like our version of the Twilight Zone. It's one big mystery. You know? Nobody knows anything, but everybody has an opinion. I think it's wonderful. I think it's just great. There's a lot of funny stuff in the world, you know, if you keep the right perspective. And the Baha'is, of course, have their own very unique kind of humor, and it's very special. Let me give you an example. Like the Baha'is in Montana. Anybody here from Montana? Good. I went to a summer school in Montana a couple of years ago. The first thing that really wasn't funny was their orientation. As part of their standard orientation, they warn you about the bears. Friends, that's not funny. They say stuff like, wake up is at 7:30 a.m., dawn prayers at 7:30. Be sure to clean the dishes from your table, and if you do want to pray for yourself, be sure that you read the warnings about the bears before you go off. And then they explain that there's a difference in the different kinds of bears. You know, there's black bears and there's brown bears. And I cannot remember the distinction, but I remember them saying something like, if you run into a brown bear, climb a tree. But if you run into a black bear, don't bother. They climb better than you do. Or they'd say, if it's a brown bear, run downhill. But if it's a black bear, don't bother. He's much faster. It's that kind of thing. You have to think about that the whole time you're praying. Speaking of Baha'i humor, you know, in Montana they had the quaintest little sayings. They would say things like, oh, he's dumber than a stump. Or he's duller than a hole. Or I remember them talking about the Mormons. They said, you can't throw a stone but hit one. I never heard stuff like that. I thought it was great. But the best thing, I remember them knocking on my door at midnight, the last night I was there, and they said, we got to tell you the rutabaga jokes. You all know what rutabaga jokes are? Rutabaga jokes are jokes that you tell when you don't want to insult an ethnic group. You know, there's a lot of great ethnic jokes out there, evidently, so the Baha'is out there say, well, we'll call them rutabagas. You know, so instead of a Polish man, a Jewish man, they say a rutabaga, and a rutabaga. For instance, they'll say stuff like, how many rutabagas does it take to make a chocolate chip cookie? And they'll say 3. 1 to mix the batter and 2 to peel the M&Ms. Stuff like that. How much time do I have? I said, how much time? They go. Okay, I'm gonna skip real fast. Consultation. One of the most important things to remember in consultation is, after you present your idea to the group, let it go. You may lose an arm. You know when they talk about frank and loving consultation? They got Frank down pat. I think they're going to work on loving in the next epoch. You know? You know, I'm a member of the Evanston Spiritual Assembly, which, by the way, is a wonderful group, and there are members of that assembly here, and they're very wonderful people. But we learned a very long time ago that when you take your idea before the group, you lay it on the table, you very gently adjust it and smooth it and shape it the way you want it, you know, and then you get out of there. The more distance you can put between you and that idea, the better. No, because it's like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, nuke it, you know. And then, you know, after they nuke it, then the firestorm passes through. And after the firestorm, you won't recognize that idea. So your best bet is not to be in the vicinity. You know, Abdul Baha said, be detached. He wasn't kidding. Some people really don't understand consultation. They'll say, we're not backbiting, we're consulting. Oh, I had a friend, he used to say, I'm not backbiting, I'm just explaining someone's approach to life. Or my favorite one, a friend of mine used to say, oh, we don't backbite. We do a little front nibbling now and then, but no backbite. Okay, I'm almost done. I'm through. I am essentially through. You know, I'm kidding about most of this stuff. But I do think that sometimes we see certain flaws or idiosyncrasies or foibles in the believers. And I think sometimes we confuse that with the revelation itself, which is unfortunate. Of course, we don't want to do that. Somehow, we must maintain our vision of the glorious goal that we are working towards, regardless of the flaws or weaknesses that we may see in our communities. And God knows you can't always laugh. Sometimes they're serious. Nonetheless, somehow we have to remember that this is God's divine plan and that He is going to help us to grow, help us to mature, help us to develop. And, we have got to remember that ultimately we are just human beings. We're imperfect souls doing the best we know how. And really only God can judge our hearts and the quality of the service that we render. So we really do have to be detached. If I could have 1 minute over, I would like to share something that's really very special to me. And I will make this very brief. As a student in college, I had a hard time as a new Baha'i. And one of the difficulties I had was I felt that the assembly didn't really appreciate the Baha'i Club, which although it was 12 members, it was really just the chairman, me. And I remember whenever anything went right, the whole club got the credit, and whenever anything went wrong, I got the blame. And that bothered me a great deal. Well, to make a long story short, I decided that's it. I'm leaving. I'm out. I'm going to be an inactive Baha'i. I'm going to take my gleanings and my prayer book, and I'm not going to worry about them. I'm going to write to the assembly and say, I resign from the Baha'i Club. Don't bother me. I'll talk to you some other time. And that was my decision. I went to bed, and I had a dream. The guardian was in the dream. I remember we were in a large city. I believe it was Tehran, in an apartment building. And in the apartment was the guardian with 2 believers, one of whom was me. And the guardian was telling a joke. And he told a real joke in my dream. I don't remember it now, but he told a real joke. And when he got to the punchline, I remember he stood up. And he jumped up and down as he told the punchline. And it was funny. I remember laughing in the dream. And then the guardian sat back down. He wiped a tear from his eye. And he said, now it's time to get back to work. And I looked at the guardian and I said, no. I said, no more work. I said, Shoghi Effendi, you work too hard. You get all of the blame. This is ridiculous. You've got to relax. You've got to rest. It's not that important. Take some time for yourself. No more work. Not now. And the guardian looked at me. At this very moment, I can see his face just like it was in that dream. He was a young man, maybe 30, maybe 40. His eyes. In his eyes was such pain. In his eyes was such deep sympathy. But more than anything else, there was an overwhelming love. And the guardian looked at me in those eyes and he said, you don't understand. I was so ashamed. I woke up in tears. I didn't talk to a Baha'i for a week. And after that, it was business as usual. I never wrote the letter resigning. I never left the club. I remained active in the faith. So I would suggest that on those rare occasions when you are depressed and you are frustrated and the teaching work is not progressing and everyone is blaming you for everything and that the foibles of the friends seem overwhelming, I would suggest that you ask yourself, have I lost the vision? Do I really understand? Do I really understand? And then turn your eyes to Baha'u'llah and find the answers. Allah Wapa, friends. Thank you.